Okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank Nick and the Net Institute for providing funding for this research. I'm presenting a paper which is joint work with Andrea Mantovani from University of Bologna and from with Francisco Ruiz-Aliceda, who is also at the Catholic University of Chile. And we are looking at a very similar, related question to the one that Feng was studying just a minute ago. We are trying to understand how can firms enter market with network effects. We know from a large literature in strategy and in industrial organization that network effects are an important barrier to entry, and we want to understand how you can overcome this barrier to entry and enter into these markets. So consider the case of Google's entry into the online storage market. This entry is very difficult because Dropbox is already there. They have a large installed base of users, and users care about how much they can share files with other users. So it is very difficult to enter this kind of market. It has been for Google. On the other hand, Google has a lot of complementary goods which can give it an advantage to enter this kind of market. For instance, Google provides Picasa, which is a picture editing software. And if you have a Google Drive, you can store all your pictures online, and you can use this software to edit your pictures, which is a very nice software. If you were using Dropbox instead, you will have to download the pictures to a computer before editing them with Picasa. So it is more cumbersome when you use the two services from different firms. So this is one of the key features that we are going to analyze. To what extent can complementarities help you enter these markets with network effect? Another interesting feature of this kind of markets is that entrants many times use bundling as an entry strategy. For instance, you can purchase a bundle of Google's products that not only include Picasa, but also email, Google Plus, etc. And you can buy this bundle, but you don't have the option of buying each product separately. So this is the only other question we are trying to understand. How can bundling help you enter this kind of markets? So this example naturally leads to these questions that I already talked about, two of them. The third question is whether the entrant should forget about entering the market and just extend the complementarity benefits to the incumbent. And this would be the case, for instance, if Google adds a button in Picasa that says "Get pictures from Dropbox," right? And this would have this question would have two sides. One is whether Google wants to actually put this button to get pictures from Dropbox, and the other one is whether Dropbox wants to allow Google to get these pictures. Right? And based on these examples, we build a model with these three main features. The first one is that there is an incumbent that has an installed base, and this installed base creates an incumbency advantage. The entrant sells a complementary good, and it may use bundling as an entry strategy. Those are the main features. And the main results of the paper, the first one is that we find indeed that bundling can facilitate entry. And this is because the entrant can extend its market power from the complementary good markets into the market with network effects. But more interesting is that the fact that the entrant may prefer not to use bundling, actually, and not to enter the market at all. And this is because bundling has implicit costs in terms of the revenues that the entrant can capture. We also find, and this was also surprising for us, that there is insufficient bundling from a social point of view. There are some cases where actually the most efficient thing would be that the entrant uses bundling and the entrant doesn't want to use bundling. And this finding is interesting because it contrasts the standard view that antitrust authorities have, which is that bundling is used to foreclose entry and to stifle competition. Here we are actually showing that bundling can actually help you enter markets and enhance competition. Well, those are the main results. Let me tell you a little bit about the model. So we build the model with 2 firms, 2 markets, and a continuum of consumers. Market A is the market where firm 1 is, and that firm is a monopolist in this market. Consumers have heterogeneous valuations for this good. And in this market, there are no network effects, and production is costless. And there is market B, where firm 2 is the incumbent. This would be Dropbox. And firm 1 wants to enter. In this market, consumers have homogeneous valuations, and there are network effects. And these are incompatible networks, which means that consumers care about the expected number of users of each of the 2 products. And there is a marginal cost. This assumption of the marginal cost is not that important, but when the marginal cost of production in this market is significant, we have additional results, which I don't know if I'm going to have time to talk about in this paper. So think about the low marginal cost case. So if this was the model, the 2 markets would be completely separate. What links the 2 models, the 2 markets, is that there is a complementarity. So consumers get an extra utility beta when they consume both goods. And we study 2 flavors for this complementarity. The first one is the case of a specific complementarity, which means that consumers get this extra benefit only if they consume the 2 goods from the same firm. And then we study what happens when the complementarity becomes general. In this case, consumers get this extra benefit if they consume both goods independent of the identity of the firm. And this would be the case if Google extends this complementarity to Dropbox users, for instance, in the example I have talked about. So some comments about the model. So what basically we don't do, but are directions that are interesting to extend the model in. The first one is that we have to distinguish between 2 forms of compatibility. The first one would be what is product compatibility, where the products of market A and market B are compatible. And in this sense, our general complementarity would be the same as, well, another way of saying that products become more complementary. And this links our paper to the systems competition literature, the mix and match literature that Nick has a lot of significant contributions in. But this is different from network compatibility. And in this paper, we assume that networks are incompatible. Right? We also assume that users single home. We don't allow for multi-homing. We are only studying a one-sided market, but these results are also important for two-sided markets. Actually, one of the first cases that we discussed where we got these ideas from is a case by Andrei Hagiu on PayPal. You may know it. And the question was whether PayPal should be afraid of credit card companies. And the answer was not so much. It should be afraid of Google. Right? At the end, Google tried to enter and also failed because network effects are really important. Right? The other assumption that we are making is that firm 2 is not present in market A, but firms sometimes will try to protect their incumbency advantage in that market by trying to enter the other market. Actually, Dropbox tried to enter into the email market and the photo editing software market. It also failed in both of them. But that would be another interesting direction to extend the paper. And another thing that we are assuming, and this actually makes entry more difficult, is that users can dispose for free of the product. So when you bundle the product, users are going to get the product for free. If they buy the other product, they get it in the bundle, but they may choose not to use it. Right? If we were assuming that they are forced to use it, it would be more like tying, and it would make entry more easier for the entrant. Right? So those are the main things we don't do. So now let me tell you about what we do. Is so we study a model with 2 stages. In the first stage, firms set prices, and then consumers form rational expectations about the adoption rates of these different technologies and choose what good to consume. And so as is usual in models of network effects, there are cases where there are multiple equilibria, and this is how we model the incumbency advantage. We assume that whenever there are multiple equilibria, users expect to coordinate on the equilibrium that favors the incumbent. So this is the main trade-off. If we didn't have network effects and we didn't have the complementarity, this would be 2 separate markets. When we have the network effect, what it does is it favors the incumbent because of this incumbency advantage, and the complementarity favors the entrant. So all the trade-offs in the model are going to come from this comparison of the complementarity versus the incumbency advantage. Okay, and we solve the game by backward induction with some game perfect Nash equilibrium. So given there are 2 important decisions that the entrant has to make, and these determine its business model. So one is the product development decision, whether it should make its complementarity general or not, and the other one is the pricing strategy, whether he should use bundling or not. And based on these 2 decisions, there are 4 business models that we have to consider. Studying each of these business models is interesting in its own right, because sometimes these firms may have external restrictions and may not be able to use all of these models. For instance, extending the complementarity may imply opening your technologies, and maybe you don't want to do it because you don't want to disclose your technologies, right? But at the end of the paper, after studying each of these cases, we study a metagame where the entrant chooses its business model between all these 4 cases, right? So I'm going to have time, given the time constraint, only to talk about the specific complementarity case. I'm going to tell you what happens with the general complementarity, which is very intuitive. So think of first of the unbundled when there is no bundling and when the complementarity is specific. So the first thing we find is that the entrant will be able to enter the market if the complementarity is large enough. That's not very surprising. And we also find that network effects actually help the incumbent. So the larger the network effects, the more difficult it is to enter the market. And the reason why network effects only favor the incumbent is because we are assuming that there is an incumbency advantage, right? So what happens when network effects increase? Well, you need a higher complementarity to be able to enter the market, and that's why this region has a positive slope. This is not unexpected. So what is more interesting is to study what happens when the entrant uses bundling and how this region changes with bundling. And what we find is that bundling allows the entrant to enter the market in cases where if it didn't use bundling, it wouldn't be able to enter, right? And the reason is also well known in the literature. Bundling, what it allows is for the entrant to extend the market power it has in market A over to market B, so it can use this to enter. So what is more interesting is that actually bundling has implicit costs in terms of market revenues, and the entrant may prefer not to use bundling at all, even if it means that it will not be able to enter the market. To understand this result, so think about what happens when I don't use bundling and I don't enter the market B. I'm going to set prices in market A as a monopolist, and I'm going to maximize revenues that I get in market A, right? When I use bundling, I lose the ability of using 2 price instruments, right? And I can only set 1 price, and I'm going to set a low price for the bundle to induce users to choose my product in market B. But to do that, I have to lower prices so much that I lose the ability of maximizing revenues in market A. Right? So in some cases, the revenues that I lose in market A are so large that I prefer not to enter and not using bundling. Right? So for this region of parameters, entry would be possible with bundling, but the entrant prefers not to use bundling. And well, remember, I'm not showing you here results for the general complementarity case, but it is very easy to tell you what would happen in this case. What happens is that you're going to use bundling if you want to enter the market. And if you want to enter the market and you would be able to enter with bundling, then you wouldn't want to have your complementarity to make it general. Because when you make your complementarity general, you give the advantage to your competitor, and it is more difficult to enter the market. So if you're going to use bundling to enter the market, you're not going to use to make a general complementarity. But on the other hand, if you're not going to enter the market and you're not going to use bundling, because it doesn't allow you to customize prices to maximize revenues in both markets, then what's the harm in making the complementarity general, right? If you make the complementarity general, your consumers are going to increase their valuation for market A, for the good in market A, so you're going to have higher revenues in market A. So if you're not going to enter the market, you're not going to use bundling, and you're going to make your complementarity general. So in equilibrium, what happens is when you can choose between these 4 business models, there are only 2 of them that you're going to consider. And so these are the two models you're going to consider. If the network effects are large enough, you're going to choose unbundling, and you're going to make the complementarity general. And if network effects are low enough, you're going to do bundling and choose a specific complementarity. So the other result is that bundling actually is good because it expands coverage of market A, right? And all consumers can enjoy this complementarity. But on the other hand, this bundling is costly for the entrant because it cannot adjust prices to maximize revenues in market A. So what happens in reality is that whenever the entrant chooses bundling, it is socially efficient. But it would be socially efficient that the entrant would choose bundling in some situations where he doesn't want to bundle the goods. Right? And that's the result that goes against mostly the standard view of regulators. Those are the results I talked about a few minutes ago. The other result that I didn't get to talk in the presentation is about loss leading. Actually, we show also that the entrant may be willing to use loss leading as an entry strategy. And this is also something that regulators actually don't like very much, when you use loss leading to enter. And to conclude, let me discuss these 2 examples. The first one is a case that is very well known for antitrust, is Windows, Microsoft's entry into the browsers market with Internet Explorer. Our results actually go against what the European Commission thought about in this case, right? Because what our model says is the following. If you're going to have a monopolist in this market, and you're going to have a monopolist in this market because there are winner-take-all dynamics, because network effects are very strong, right? If you're going to have a monopolist, you better have a monopolist with a complementary good than a monopolist that doesn't have a complementary good. So actually, what our model would suggest is that Internet Explorer's entry into the browser market was good, right? And it also talks about the antitrust case that the European Commission is preparing against Google. So Google, with Android, it forced phone developers to install lots of apps that they wouldn't want to install, maybe because they have competing apps. For instance, Samsung has its own app store, but Google forces Samsung to install Google Play, right? The Google Store, sorry. So our results suggest that this could be also good, because what this allows is for Google to get this network effect and compete in a better way against Apple, for instance. Right? So those are the results I wanted to.
Our discussant is Sonia Gilbook from Stern.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Forgive me for my voice. So I really enjoyed reading this paper, so let's get right into it. So bundling has gotten a lot of bad rep. So imagine a situation where Johnson & Johnson produces both shampoo and conditioner. People care about buying both. And now I discovered a formula that lets me produce shampoo for cheaper. But if Johnson & Johnson bundles their shampoo and conditioner, then no one's going to buy my shampoo, right? Because if you care about conditioner, you already end up with Johnson & Johnson's. So this last leading strategy is anti-competitive. Another thing that happens is, say my shampoo is preferred by customers if they had the option, but now that they don't have the option, they stuck with the less desirable good. On the other hand, bundling can increase welfare if we think about goods that have negatively correlated valuations for consumers. Then sometimes everyone ends up getting the bundle, so everyone gets both goods, and that could increase welfare for everyone. So in this paper, kind of a mix of all three. So it talks about another benefit of bundling is that it allows entry for a company where the incumbent has a lot of intrinsic advantage. So it might be actually pro-competitive. So the model, I basically have the same slide as Gaston did. So there's a market A where there's a monopolist of firm 1. The valuation in that market is distributed uniformly, so there's some way of extracting extra profit for a monopolist. And the market A, good of market A provides a complementarity advantage if it's purchased together with the good in market B. The good in market B is produced by an incumbent, it's firm 2 at a cost C. Consumers value it the same. And there's a network advantage in this market that says that consumers get extra utility alpha for every other person who consumes that good. So the way we're going to model this, the way the authors model this, is that firm 1 wants to enter market B. It has a complementarity advantage, right, because it produces good A. And so that has some complementarity with good B. But firm 2 is going to have the network advantage, and the way that it is modeled is that the equilibrium that will be favored is the one where firm 2 produces more of market B. So in the end, what's going to happen is that market B will either be captured fully by firm 2 or fully by firm 1. Okay. So the main result is that without bundling, there's some set of parameters. So alpha here is this network advantage. So for lower network advantage, the firm 1 will be able to enter market B, right, by introducing the specific complementarity. And beyond some cutoff, it will not enter, and it might as well offer general complementarity to extract extra surplus from the market where it actually stays. However, with the bundling, this set of the entry is expanding. So with the bundling, there's some intermediate values of this network advantage at which without bundling, firm A wouldn't be able to enter, and now it is. And because of this bundling effect, now everyone gets both goods, A and B, so they benefit, basically everyone benefits from both the network advantage and the complementarity advantage. So that's good. So we care about that. And in fact, we might want to, the pointer doesn't work, the socially optimal will be to move that cutoff to the left. Okay, so I was thinking about more examples. So of course, Google is a big one. So we can think about the biggest network advantages in such markets as social media. So Facebook, we can think of firm 2, has a platform that everyone already uses. Now Google Plus can offer its service as a bundle with all the other Google products and induce firms to use it and enjoy this complementarity that you can just email things back and forth, etc. We know that that has not been very successful for Google. The other place where Google entered was this mailbox, this tool for sorting emails. So you used to be able to install this application where, so basically we've talked about this before, right? Like the platform adapted the technology. Okay, and then the last example I could think of where the verdict is still outstanding is there's a site TripAdvisor that offers travelers advice on where to go, ratings on hotels, ratings on tourist attractions. And now Airbnb is expanding its services to do just that. So because people often book their rooms through Airbnb, then they might enjoy the complementarity of not having to go to a different website. So it'd be nice if Airbnb was succeeded in that, for users anyway. Okay, so one major comment is it's not just the network effects that could be this incumbent advantage to help the entrant overcome. So it could also be something like economies of scale. So if we think about that the cost of production drops by alpha for every person that you're producing the good for, and if the cost savings are passed on to the consumers, then essentially the model will be exactly the same. Okay, there may be some learning advantage as well. So say you're in the market for a while, your costs have dropped a little bit. Now the entrance has even more potential to learn, but it has to start at a lower price. So maybe that's bundling could help them enter this market and then achieve even lower cost. And then the last thing is, are these benefits permanent? So we think about two things that happens in this model because of bundling. So one is this: if firm 1 is not successful in entering, then firm 2 still has threat of entry, and it's constrained for its prices. So it might actually have lower prices if there wasn't this threat of entry from bundling. Okay, so that's one benefit, even if firm 1 doesn't enter. And the second benefit is that maybe it's actually optimal for us, for consumers, for firm 1 to enter. And so now this region where it can enter expands. However, what happens when firm 1 actually takes over market B is unclear, right? Because now we have a monopolist in both markets, and maybe the optimal thing to do for them is unbundle once they capture both markets. And then we're kind of back to these negative potential effects of bundling. So perhaps the argument that bundling is good would be more relevant for the first point than the second. And that's all I have. Thank you.
We always talk about with my co-authors as network effects as economies of scale in demand. I don't know if we wrote it in the paper, but your comment is very good. So we will look it if we have it, or else we're going to write it and also learning. And the other question that would be interesting to see what happens is if the entrant has incentives to unbundle after capturing market B. But even in that case, it could be good that it captures market B, even if it unbundles after capturing it. So, but we have to look at it because we didn't. Thank you very much.
Okay, my question. My question has to do more with your last slide, which was the application to Microsoft and to Google. And first of all, I think that these are completely different issues, because what Microsoft was doing with Internet Explorer was it included Internet Explorer in the operating system, but you could use anything you wanted as a browser. The thing with Google in the Android system is pretty different. What Google does is goes to Samsung and the various manufacturers and tells them, look, I mean, we have this very valuable application for you called Store, or equivalent Play, whatever it's called, which is important because it downloads updates and so on. But if you use that, you have to use Google search, and you have to put it in a prominent place on the screen. And you have to make it a default application. This is way more restrictive than what Microsoft did, because Microsoft never told the users you have to use Internet Explorer. They told them, look, use whatever you want, but we're going to bundle Internet Explorer so you have a browser there. So it's completely different. And I think the European Commission is correct to be upset about this, because additionally, these things are independent applications. The store applications or the play application and the search application are completely independent. There is really no reason for them to be sold together. They're sold together only by contract. They're tied by contract. And there is very specific line in the European Union antitrust law which says that tying by contract is illegal per se. It's not like the United States, in which you have to calculate utility and market shares and consumer surplus and so on. This is so the European Union has this very strict law. But I know that doesn't apply to you because you're trying to calculate surplus. But even if you calculate surplus, I don't see why it would really be so bad to have a world without that requirement, so that third-party search engines, and not necessarily Samsung's, but Microsoft's, Yahoo's, and so on could do it. Sorry, I talked too long.
Maybe, no, we can talk later about this because I think it's very interesting. Thank you for the comments. So.